So many buyers of residential property in the UK are absolutely shocked by some of the differences compared to buying property in Sweden. And this can be really surprising, especially for sophisticated Swedish buyers and investors expecting a very simple and efficient process once they find a property that they want to buy. And it can be very surprising, especially in this day of digital sophistication. So, as many Swedes will know, if they want to buy a residential property in Sweden, for example, in Stockholm, after agreeing an offer with the estate agent and everyone comes to an agreement, it's very simple and it's easily settled by the agent, and there are really no other parties involved, like lawyers, etc. And they easily just check the identification with bank ID, and it's all very simple. Well, in England, it is different. In Britain, it's different. It's far more complicated and risky and filled with difficulties compared to the same, what should be the same process in Sweden. So here are some of the key differences to be aware of when buying London residential property compared to Swedish residential property. And it was actually suggested by one of my recent clients that I should do a video on this topic because it can really help buyers to understand and to be prepared for, shall I say, the added complications and to expect this to be normal, as opposed to different. So, in Britain, in London, for example, after the offer is agreed with the seller and the buyer, then both the buyer and the seller need to appoint solicitors to act for them in a process called conveyancing. And this is what's required in Britain to be able to complete the whole process of buying it and finally recording the transaction with Land Registry. It will normally take at least 3 months, depending on how fast the solicitors are. And obviously, you need both sides to be behaving in terms of providing the information, etc. So minimum 3 months, normally it can take even longer, especially if there are outstanding questions. And also, especially if there is bank lending. If you're buying for cash, then things are faster. But even if you're a cash buyer, assume that the toing and froing of asking of questions can take a lot of time. And during this process called conveyancing, which is driven by the solicitors together with the buyers and the sellers, the buyers will ask questions about the seller, from the seller, sorry, about the property, and the sellers will answer, but they are often advised by their solicitors to say as little as possible. So you might get monosyllabic answers, and sometimes there might actually be no information at all. And in particular, in areas where there is a freeholder or a managing agent, for example, in a large apartment block, this means that you as a buyer might be faced with a very real situation that you are looking to purchase a property where there is some significant vacuum or absence of information, and it might be important to manage that risk and understand how much of an issue is it, why are they withholding the information, and what might the risk be? For example, if the residents are coming together to buy the block from the freeholder, there would be a premium for that cost, and maybe they are not fully aware of the total cost the seller, but they're hoping maybe that by withholding that information, they can achieve a better price. For example, if it was known, and the price might certainly be a few pounds, then that is something that the buyer should take into consideration in their sales price. But often, as I've heard, one can use this to one's advantage simply by lowering the price, but this is something that one has to be aware of. So just expect that it is a far more complicated process where the buyer is trying to uncover information together with a solicitor and a surveyor. And there is something in the UK called buyer beware. So it's up to the buyer to find as much information as possible about the property before buying. And the seller will try to say as little as possible. And this is really why up to one third of property transactions in the UK and in London don't actually complete, even after solicitors are first appointed, which is a big and significant risk for all parties involved in the transaction because they want to see, everyone wants a successful transaction. But I am very much on the side of my clients, which are the buyers, where they have appointed me, and making sure that they are buying the right property at the right price and that we have uncovered all of the risks that we need to in the transaction, whether it comes from previous experience from my side or from asking pointed and correct questions via the solicitors, or that the surveyor can uncover information. That's really important to make sure that you're not taking on a risk unless it's already accounted for, costed into the transaction, and we're buying at a cheaper price. Another aspect to be aware of is that it's actually the buyer's responsibility in the UK to pay the right amount of stamp duty land tax. It's called SDLT. And so it's a buyer's responsibility that might come as a surprise to some of our leading politicians, like, well, they will rename nameless, but they did not pay the right amount of stamp duty. And having the support in knowing how to calculate this and to be aware of how this aspect might change. For example, if there's another entity buying instead of a person, or whether that, if it's a person buying, are they resident in the UK? Are they a first-time buyer or not? And how to properly calculate it to really understand whether the transaction is feasible or not. So when you look at the whole aspect, and where information can often be muddied, withheld, and I've even seen examples, it's actually quite common, where the estate agents who are working for the sellers will, let's call it politely, misguide the information. They will state the room sizes or the floor plan of the property as being much larger than it actually is. And in one example I uncovered last year, there was a difference of 20%, which could make a massive difference to a buyer. And I have a few tricks up my sleeve of how to very quickly find out what the correct floor plan is. So this is why if you're a remote or busy buyer of London residential property, it's really helpful to have someone on the ground with the right experience and knowledge who can really be working solely for you as the buyer and who has your interests at the forefront of their mind and agenda. And that means sometimes being totally happy walking away from the transaction if this is in the right interest of the client. So in my case, the service doesn't just involve helping to find the ideal property and to double check it compared to the sales particulars on the property portals, but it's really in anticipating which properties will have higher risk because of, is it a short lease or a freeholder, which has a bad reputation and one would want to avoid. And also to the most important aspect is not just finding that property and to find the ones that will most likely succeed, but more importantly, to drive the whole process and navigate through the choppy waters with speed and efficiency, while uncovering and managing any risks one needs to be aware of along the way. And of course, appointing suitable third parties such as solicitors and surveyors for the best possible support. And so I personally really believe in London residential property and in buying it, that it's a wise long-term move for asset diversification and protection and even growth. But the actual purchase process is not plain sailing. So if you're a Swede or a busy or remote buyer of London residential property, having some help on the ground to fight your corner goes a real long way in helping to protect your capital or grow your capital, either with a successful transaction or, unfortunately, in some cases, simply stepping away when appropriate. As ever, I'm here at your service. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.